In April of 2014, my friend Paul and I drove up to Loch Awe in Scotland for a weekend of fishing. We had known each other since primary school and had always been close, but as we got older, full-time jobs, marriages, kids, finding time to spend together became harder and harder. That shift really began around 2009 or 2010. It was also around that time that Paul first invited me to go fishing with him. I didn't even know he was into fishing back then. But after joining him that first time, I immediately understood why he loved it so much. Working 9 to 5 all week, coming home to the joyful chaos of raising young kids, it was rewarding but exhausting. Back in my early 20s, the idea of sitting beside a river doing absolutely nothing sounded painfully boring. But later in life, when every day felt like either work chaos or home chaos, those quiet afternoons became pure relief. Fast forward about 4 years, and we were heading north to a private loch where we had permission to fish. A friend of a friend's father was a member, and we were told that if anyone asked, just mentioning his name would be enough. That permission mattered, especially because we planned to camp there for 2 nights. We weren't new to camping by then. We'd been on at least a dozen similar trips and had upgraded from bare-bones survival to comfort and convenience. We brought proper cooking gear, portable chargers, and a small speaker for music. That year, though, Paul brought something new. As soon as we finished setting up camp, he pulled out 2 small walkie-talkies sealed in a waterproof bag. They were fully charged, cheap but reliable, and supposedly had batteries that would last a full week. The idea was to save phone battery life since we were constantly playing music, watching videos, or messaging each other. The radios turned out to be more than useful. They were fun. Whenever one of us wandered off to collect firewood, check bait, or grab something from camp, we'd talk over the radios. We'd pretend to be military operators, hurling insults back and forth in mock seriousness. It became a running joke and something we used every time we were separated. That Saturday afternoon, both our lighters failed within half an hour of each other. We'd already had a couple of beers, so I volunteered to walk to the nearest small shop while Paul stayed behind to watch our gear. It was about 6 miles round trip. We kept in contact over the radios at first, but after about 2 miles, once I crested the hills, the signal faded. I reached the shop, bought several disposable lighters along with a few other items, and started the long walk back. For the first mile, the radio was silent. Once I crested the hills, I started picking up faint static. I tested it every minute or two, confused as to why I'd had better range on the way out than on the way back. Then the radio crackled. At first, I couldn't make out what was being said. I tried telling Paul that I couldn't hear him clearly, but it didn't seem like he could hear me either. I kept walking, leaving the radio on, waiting for his voice to come through properly. When it finally did, something was very wrong. There was a strange metallic whine at first, which I assumed was interference. I turned the radio off and back on again. When it came back, the sound was louder, clearer. It wasn't interference. It was Paul, and he was crying. Not loud, uncontrollable sobbing, but quiet, broken whimpers, short bursts of crying, as if he were holding down the transmit button just long enough for the sound to spill through. I immediately asked if he was okay. I assumed he'd received terrible news, something you only cry about when someone has died or something equally serious has happened. I kept asking what was wrong while walking faster. He didn't answer. I assumed he still couldn't hear me. Then he spoke. Through tears, he said, "I'm so sorry. Lydia." I stopped walking. I demanded to know what he was talking about, who Lydia was, what was happening. There was no response. He kept crying, repeating the same words. Paul had never mentioned anyone named Lydia before. It wasn't his partner's name. It wasn't his child's name. I started jogging. As I ran, he got louder, desperate, begging for forgiveness. I shouted reassurance into the radio, telling him I was almost there, telling him we'd sort it out. I didn't know what I was saying. I was terrified. Paul was not someone who cried easily. Even as a kid, he hid pain at all costs. Hearing him like that filled me with dread. When I was only a few hundred meters from camp, I told him I was nearly there. Then he screamed. He shouted the name Lydia again and again, the sound distorted horribly. Then came a long electronic scream, drawn out, unnatural, and then complete silence. I ran. I sprinted back to camp, calling his name, heart hammering. When I arrived, Paul wasn't there. I searched the campsite, no response. I ran to the lock where we'd been fishing, still nothing. Then, from the trees to my left, Paul stepped out, carrying firewood. He looked completely normal, calm, slightly annoyed. He asked what I was shouting about. I stared at him, confused, convinced it had to be a prank. I asked him directly if this was a joke. He said no. He told me his radio had gone silent hours earlier and that he hadn't heard a single thing from me until I came running into camp. Once I calmed down, I told him exactly what I'd heard. He denied crying. Then I mentioned the name, Lydia. His expression changed. He asked if I'd gone through his phone, if I'd spoken to his girlfriend. I hadn't. Finally, he explained. Only 2 people knew what he was about to tell me. His girlfriend had found out she was pregnant just over a week earlier. They hadn't planned it, but they decided to keep the baby. They'd begun discussing names. If it was a boy, Paul liked the name Max. If it was a girl, they both agreed on Lydia. I felt sick. Months later, a baby girl was born. They named her Lydia. For years afterward, the memory stayed with me. The older she got, the less afraid I became. But even now, part of me still wonders whether I heard something that hadn't happened yet, or something that never should. And that thought is far more frightening than anything I heard through that radio.
This happened on New Year's Eve, or rather early New Year's morning. I was spending the holiday by myself. I had already visited family for Christmas, and when New Year's rolled around, there was no one to meet up with or celebrate alongside. So I stayed in. I cracked open a couple of beers, settled onto the couch, and let the TV run while the night passed. I watched the entire Times Square countdown, the confetti, the cheering crowds, all of it. Once that wrapped up, I switched over to some older holiday movies and let them play in the background. I wasn't especially tired, and by the time the clock crept past 2 a.m., I felt restless. I'd been sitting there most of the day, barely moving, and suddenly had the urge to get up and do something. Anything. I walked over to the window and looked outside. Snow was falling lightly, just enough to coat the ground. It was cold, obviously, and completely dark, but the idea of a quiet walk sounded peaceful. Without thinking too much about it, I threw on my jacket, pulled on a hat and gloves, and stepped out into the night to wander around the neighborhood. The silence hit me immediately. Even for that hour, it felt unusually quiet. I had assumed there would still be signs of parties, music, voices, cars passing by, but there was nothing. Every house was dark, except for soft outdoor Christmas lights glowing faintly against the snow. The streets were empty, no movement, no sound. Strangely enough, it felt calm, almost comforting. I honestly couldn't tell you how long I walked. I wasn't completely sober, so time felt slippery. I wasn't following any particular route either, just drifting through the streets, cutting corners, turning randomly, letting my feet decide where to go. Eventually, I ended up at the local park. The walking path didn't look like it had been cleared since earlier that day, but it didn't seem to be more than a couple inches of snow. It looked manageable, and I figured the change in scenery might keep the walk from getting boring, so I headed down the path anyway. After a short distance, I realized 2 things. First, the snow was deeper than it looked and getting harder to push through. Second, none of the path lights were on. Normally, there were small lamp posts lining the trail, but they were completely dark. Maybe they shut them off for the winter. Either way, it wasn't long before I decided it wasn't worth it and turned back. I had only been walking back for about a minute, dragging my boots through the snow, when something caught my eye. There were footprints alongside mine, fresh ones. They matched my path perfectly, running right beside my tracks from only moments earlier. Someone had been walking behind me. What bothered me was that those prints hadn't been there before. I was certain of it. And yet, when I looked around, there was no one in sight. I tried to follow the second set of tracks to see where they went, and that's when my stomach dropped. They veered off the trail, disappearing into the unlit trees and open darkness beyond the path. I couldn't see anything out there. It was completely black. For all I knew, someone could have been standing only a few feet away, watching me, and I wouldn't have had any way of knowing. I picked up my pace and headed out of the park. Still, I didn't fully panic. Looking back, I probably should have. I chalked it up to coincidence, or maybe my buzz dulling my sense of danger. At the time, I forced myself to believe it was nothing. I continued walking through the neighborhood for another 15 minutes, deliberately not heading straight home. I didn't notice anyone else around, and eventually I convinced myself that I was safe. When I finally got back, I took off my coat and winter gear and decided a shower might help me relax enough to sleep. As I started up the stairs, something immediately felt wrong. It was dark upstairs, completely dark. That stopped me in my tracks. I'm the kind of person who leaves lights on constantly, especially if I know I won't be upstairs for hours. I hadn't gone up there since waking up that morning, and I knew, absolutely knew, I had left the lights on. I carefully climbed the remaining steps and reached the hallway. I turned the light on and stood there for a moment, unsure what I was expecting to see. Slowly, I checked each room, leaning in just enough to look around. Nothing seemed out of place. After checking a room, I closed the door behind me. That's why my heart nearly stopped when I turned back around. The first door near the stairs, the one I had already checked, was wide open. In that instant, I was certain someone was in my house. I froze. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, I called out, asking if anyone was there. My voice sounded thin and shaky. I didn't move. Whoever it was could have been in that room or anywhere else in the house by now. I remember inching down the hallway towards the open doorway, each step slow and silent. My heart was pounding, adrenaline rushing, my stomach twisting with dread as I got closer. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I wasn't in my bed. I was lying on the hallway floor. My head was spinning, my vision blurred, and a brutal migraine pulsed behind my eyes. Only about 10 minutes seemed to have passed. It was obvious I'd been attacked and knocked unconscious. I had no memory of the actual encounter, only the moments leading up to it. I called 911 immediately. Whoever broke into my house was gone by the time the police arrived. I told them everything I could remember, but it still eats at me that there's a chunk of time missing. I almost certainly came face to face with the person who did it. I might have been able to describe him. I might have even known who he was. But my mind won't give it up. The investigation never went anywhere. No solid leads, no answers. I still don't know who it was or what they truly intended, but part of me believes they never planned on me waking up at all.